My spoiled and entitled younger sister got pregnant by my older sister's fiancé 3 weeks before their wedding and announced it at dinner, so we gave her a brutal reality check and slowly ruined her life. After my older sister Rebecca discovered that Jessica had been secretly sleeping with her fiancé David for 6 months and was pregnant with his child, there was a lot of tension in the whole family. Of course, Jessica, the golden child, was shameless and went on to marry David in the exact same venue Rebecca had booked, wearing a white dress despite being 7 months pregnant. Rebecca found it extremely hard at the beginning, especially since Jessica had used Rebecca's own wedding plans, vendors, and even tried to steal her wedding dress. We were extremely close through this time period, and we helped each other through the betrayal. Eventually, she got over it, met a really successful investment banker named Malik, who understood her past trauma and treated her like a queen. They got married in a beautiful destination wedding in Santorini, and I was actually the maid of honor. She even invited our parents to the wedding, despite the fact they had attended Jessica's wedding to David and acted like nothing was wrong. My parents didn't attend, however. A few more years went by, and eventually our parents reached out to Rebecca begging to reconcile with her, and this is where the crap storm started. Rebecca agreed to reconcile and came to dinner along with her husband, Malik. Jessica was also there with David and their 2 kids. Throughout the evening, I noticed Jessica kept making snide comments about how some people can't have children. Rebecca and Malik had been trying, and how David was such an amazing father, but Malik just held Rebecca's hand under the table. When it was time for dinner, my parents made a toast. Then out of nowhere, Jessica stood up and said that she was so blessed to have such a beautiful family and that she was pregnant again. She then redirected to Rebecca and said, "Sis, I know it must be hard for you because David chose me and we have this beautiful family now, but thanks for your blessing. I know it must be hard for you to be here, knowing you can't have children while I'm on my 3rd, but I applaud your bravery." This was the moment where Jessica got the biggest reality check of her life. Rebecca's husband, Malik, who had been quietly investigating David's finances for months, stood up and said, "Actually, Jessica, we have some news too. We're not only expecting twins through IVF, but I've also just finished acquiring David's company through a hostile takeover. As of Monday morning, your husband will be unemployed." He then turned to David and continued, "Oh, and those 3 other women you've been sleeping with? They've all been contacted by my wife's divorce attorney friend. Jessica, you might want to get tested. But here's the best part. Remember that prenup you signed because you were so desperate to marry him? Well, infidelity clause means you get nothing. You're about to be a single mother of 3 with no income, no house, and a cheating husband who's about to be served divorce papers by the woman he's been seeing for the past year. She's pregnant too, by the way. You think you're so special because you won David? You won a man who cheats on everyone, including you. You destroyed my wife's life for a man who's been systematically cheating on you since your honeymoon. You're such a pathetic woman that you bragged about stealing him, not realizing you stole trash. My wife upgraded to someone who would never touch another woman, while you downgraded to someone who can't keep it in his pants. How does it feel to know your whole marriage is a lie? That your children will grow up knowing their father has multiple other families? Do you sleep well at night knowing he's with other women while you're home with the kids? Nobody respects a woman who steals another woman's man, but everybody pities a woman whose stolen man turned out to be worthless." Everyone in the room just stared as David's phone began buzzing nonstop. The other women had started posting about him on social media, and his divorce attorney was calling, but then Jessica started laughing, a slow, unsettling laugh that made everyone uncomfortable. She pulled out her phone and showed us a video. "You think you've won, Rebecca? Malik? I've been recording every private conversation you've had in your home for the past 2 years, including the one where you discussed the hostile takeover before it was public information. That's insider trading, sweetheart. And the best part? I have recordings of you admitting to something much, much worse. Something that happened back in college that you thought nobody knew about." Rebecca's face went white as Jessica continued. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off the takeover, you're going to transfer $5 million to my account, and you're going to smile while you do it. Or I send this to the FBI tomorrow morning." Malik started to speak, but Jessica cut him off. "Oh, and Malik, I have recordings of your, let's call them creative tax strategies too." Turns out David wasn't the only one who's been naughty. That's when Rebecca started laughing too. She looked at Jessica with an expression I'd never seen before and said quietly, "You really should have checked who actually owns the security company that installed those cameras, Jess." The room went dead silent. Jessica's smile faltered for the first time. "What did you just say?" Rebecca stood up slowly, her hand resting on her stomach. "I said, you should have checked who owns the security company. Plot twist, little sister. I've known about your recordings for 18 months, and I've been feeding you exactly what I wanted you to hear. Every single word." Jessica's phone suddenly went black, then mine, then everyone's in the room. "The question is," Rebecca continued, walking toward Jessica, "do you want to know what I've been recording in your house? Because I promise you, it's so much worse than anything you think you have on me." That's when we heard the sirens outside. The sirens grew louder, and through the dining room window, I saw an ambulance pull up to our neighbor's house. Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down was being wheeled out on a stretcher. The timing was coincidental, but the tension in our dining room made it feel like the sirens were for us. Jessica's hands shook as she frantically pressed buttons on her dead phone. David stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and fear. Our parents sat speechless, their eyes darting between their 2 daughters like they were watching a tennis match they couldn't comprehend. Rebecca pulled out her own phone, which somehow still worked perfectly. She tapped the screen a few times, and suddenly Jessica's voice filled the room from hidden speakers. "David's so stupid. He actually thinks those other women mean something. I've been moving money from his accounts for months. By the time I'm done with him, he'll have nothing left." The recording continued, Jessica's voice clear as day, discussing her plans to frame Rebecca for various crimes, her schemes to turn their parents against her permanently, and most damning of all, her confession about deliberately causing Rebecca's first miscarriage by slipping something into her drink at a family barbecue 2 years ago. David lunged for Rebecca's phone, but Malik stepped between them. Despite being smaller than David, Malik's calm demeanor made David step back immediately. "Sit down," Malik said quietly. David sat. Jessica's face had gone from red to white to green. She clutched her stomach, and for a moment I thought she might actually be sick right there on our mother's Persian rug. That's edited," Jessica stammered. "You can't prove anything. Those recordings are fake." Rebecca smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Really? Because I have the originals, time-stamped, location tagged. Some of them even have video, Jess. Like the one where you're in my house, going through my medical records while I was at my fertility appointments. Or the one where you're teaching your son to call me the sad auntie who can't have babies. He's 4, Jessica. 4 years old, and you're already teaching him cruelty. Our mother finally found her voice. Rebecca, Jessica, please, we're family. We can work this out without all this drama. Drama? Rebecca turned to our mother, and years of suppressed anger finally surfaced. She slept with my fiancé for 6 months. She wore white to her wedding while pregnant with his child. She used my wedding plans, my vendors, tried to steal my dress, and you called it drama? You attended her wedding like nothing happened. You chose her over me, just like you always have. We didn't choose sides. Our father protested weakly. Silence is choosing a side, I found myself saying. Everyone turned to look at me. You've been silent about Jessica's behavior our whole lives. When she stole Rebecca's boyfriends in high school, you said boys will be boys. When she copied Rebecca's college essays and got into the same school, you said imitation was flattery. When she literally stole her fiancé, you said Rebecca should be happy for her sister. You've been choosing Jessica by enabling her for 28 years. Jessica tried a different tactic. Tears. They came easily. They always had. I'm pregnant, she wailed. You can't do this to a pregnant woman. Think of my children. I am thinking of your children, Rebecca said coldly. They deserve better than a mother who lies, cheats, and steals. They deserve better than parents who teach them that hurting others is acceptable if you can get away with it. She turned back to her phone and pulled up another file. This one's my favorite, Jess. It's you and David arguing about his affairs. Not because you're hurt, but because, and I quote, those sluts better not think they're getting any of my money. You knew about every single one of them. You didn't care as long as the checks kept coming. David's phone suddenly came back to life, buzzing with what seemed like 100 notifications at once. His face went pale as he read through them. The business accounts. They're frozen. All of them. How did you? Turns out when you use company funds to pay for hotel rooms for your girlfriends, that's embezzlement, Malik explained calmly. The board was very interested in those receipts. They called an emergency meeting an hour ago. You're not unemployed yet, David, but you will be by morning. And those women you've been seeing, they've all been very cooperative with providing evidence, especially Samantha, the one who's pregnant. She's particularly angry about you telling her you were divorced. Jessica stood up abruptly, knocking over her water glass. You can't prove any of this. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll take everything you have. With what lawyer? Rebecca asked. The one you've been having an affair with? Oh yes, I know about Marcus too. His wife knows now as well. She's also a lawyer, by the way. Senior partner at their firm. I don't think Marcus will be taking your calls anymore. The room felt like it was spinning. Our parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. David was frantically scrolling through his phone, presumably watching his life fall apart in real time. Jessica stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Here's what's going to happen, Rebecca said, standing up and placing a protective hand over her stomach. You're going to leave my house alone. You're going to stop spreading lies about me. You're going to get therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind where you manipulate the therapist into thinking you're the victim. And you're going to stay away from me and my family. Or what? Jessica snarled, the mask finally completely off. You'll release some edited recordings? You think you've won? I'll destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Rebecca pulled up one final video on her phone. It was Jessica, sitting in what looked like Rebecca's bedroom, holding a bottle of Hills. These should do it, Jessica's recorded voice said. A few of these in her smoothie, and bye-bye baby. She'll think it's another miscarriage. Poor, barren Rebecca. The room went completely silent. Even the sirens outside had faded away. You recorded yourself planning to poison me, Rebecca said quietly. You recorded yourself actually doing it, and you kept the video. Why, Jess? As a trophy? Jessica's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair, all fight gone. I didn't mean, it wasn't supposed to what? Call my baby? Just make me sick enough to miscarry? What exactly was your plan? Our mother started crying. Real tears, not the manipulative kind Jessica wielded like weapons. My babies, she sobbed. What have you done? What have we done? You enabled a monster, I said flatly. And now you're seeing what monsters do when they think they're invincible. David suddenly jumped up. I need to go. I need to. The lawyers. I have to. He headed for the door, but Malik's voice stopped him. I wouldn't go home if I were you. Samantha's there with her brothers. They're very protective of their pregnant sister, the one you told you were getting divorced to marry. David's face went even paler, if that was possible. He slumped against the doorframe. Rebecca gathered her purse and took Malik's offered hand. We're leaving now. Jess, you have 48 hours to get your cameras and any other devices out of my home. I've already changed the locks, so you'll need to call first. A security team will supervise your visit. Rebecca, please, Jessica whispered. I'm your sister. No, Rebecca said firmly. You're someone who happened to share a womb with me. Sisters don't try to poison each other. Sisters don't steal each other's fiancés. Sisters don't cause miscarriages out of jealousy. You're not my sister. You're just someone I used to know. She turned to our parents. And you two, I'm done hoping you'll choose me. Choose your golden child. Live with that choice. But know that my children will never know you. They'll never know the grandparents who stood by while one daughter tried to destroy the other. As Rebecca and Malik walked toward the door, Jessica made one last desperate attempt. You're recording this too, aren't you? This whole thing. You're just as bad as me. Rebecca paused at the doorway and looked back. The difference is, I'm recording evidence of crimes. You recorded yourself committing them. And for the record, this isn't being recorded. I don't need to. Everyone here heard everything. Mom, Dad, David, our sister. Everyone knows who you really are now. That's punishment enough. They left, and the silence that followed was deafening. Jessica sat at the table staring at her hands. David stood frozen by the door. Our parents held each other, looking lost and broken. I stood up to leave too. Where are you going? My mother asked desperately. To Rebecca's, I said simply. To celebrate the twins with my actual sister. The one who never tried to poison anyone. The one you should have protected instead of enabling her abuser. As I walked out, I heard Jessica start to sob. Not the fake tears she'd perfected over years of manipulation, but real, ugly crying. The kind that comes when you realize you've destroyed everything and everyone around you, and there's no one left to blame but yourself. The ambulance was gone when I stepped outside. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful even. But inside that house, a family was falling apart, and for once, the right person was paying the price. I drove to Rebecca's house in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I processed what had just happened. The quiet suburban streets felt surreal after the chaos we'd left behind. When I pulled into her driveway, I saw Malik's car already there, and the porch light was on, welcoming me. Rebecca opened the door before I could knock. Her face showed exhaustion, but there was also relief. We hugged without words, and I followed her inside where Malik was making tea in the kitchen. How long have you known about the poisoning? I asked, accepting the cup he offered. Rebecca sat down heavily, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. 6 months. I found the video when I was going through the security footage looking for for something else entirely. At first, I couldn't believe it. Even knowing everything Jessica had done, I never thought she'd go that far. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was our mother, hysterical. Jessica had shown up at their house at midnight, demanding they help her. She'd brought the kids, who were confused and crying. David hadn't come home, and Jessica had discovered he'd emptied their joint savings account before the business accounts were frozen. I met Rebecca for breakfast to update her. She listened calmly, stirring her decaf coffee. She's going to escalate, Rebecca said matter-of-factly. Jessica never learned how to lose. This is just the beginning. She was right. By noon, Jessica had called me 17 times. The voicemails started pleading, then angry, then threatening. She claimed she had more recordings, more secrets. She said she'd ruin all of us if we didn't help her. That afternoon, Rebecca invited me to her home office. The walls were covered with timelines, documents, and photographs. It looked like a detective's investigation board. I've been preparing for this for 2 years, she explained. Every move Jessica might make, every lie she might tell, I've anticipated it. She showed me folders of evidence, bank statements showing Jessica's theft from David's accounts, text messages between Jessica and her various affair partners, even recordings of Jessica coaching her children to be cruel to Rebecca at family gatherings. The worst part, Rebecca said, pulling out another folder, is what she's done to those kids. She's been using them as weapons since they were born. 3 days passed in relative quiet. Then Jessica made her next move. She showed up at Malik's investment firm with her children in tow, causing a scene in the lobby. She accused him of destroying her family, of stealing from innocent children. Security had to escort her out, but not before several clients witnessed the spectacle. Malik came home that evening looking stressed for the first time since this began. She's trying to damage my professional reputation, he told Rebecca. My partners aren't happy about the drama. Rebecca squeezed his hand. I'm sorry. I never wanted this to affect your work. Hey, Malik said firmly. We're in this together. I knew who Jessica was when I married you. This isn't your fault. But Jessica wasn't done. The next day, she created social media accounts under fake names and started posting Rebecca's personal information online. She shared twisted versions of their childhood, painting Rebecca as the jealous sister who'd always resented Jessica's success. She even posted photos from Rebecca's first wedding planning, claiming Rebecca had stolen the ideas from her. I spent hours reporting the accounts, but new ones kept appearing. Rebecca remained calm, documenting everything. Let her dig her own grave, she said. Every post is evidence of harassment. A week later, Jessica tried a different approach. She had the children call Rebecca, crying about how they missed their Auntie Becca. The 4-year-old's voice was coached, obviously reading from a script Jessica had written. Mommy says you hate us now. Why don't you love us anymore? Rebecca had to leave the room after that call. It was the first time I'd seen her cry since this all started. Those poor kids, she whispered. They don't deserve this. Meanwhile, David had resurfaced. He'd been staying with Samantha, the pregnant woman he'd been seeing, but that arrangement exploded when 2 of his other girlfriends showed up at her apartment. The resulting confrontation made it onto neighborhood social media pages, with videos of David being chased down the street by 3 angry women. He called me, desperate. You have to help me talk to Rebecca. This has gone too far. I'll do anything to make it stop. You made your choices, David, I told him. You destroyed your own life. Rebecca just held up a mirror. Our parents were caught in the middle, housing Jessica and the children while trying to process the revelation about the poisoning. Mom called me daily, alternating between defending Jessica, she was probably joking in that video, and expressing horror. How could she do that to her own sister? 2 weeks into the chaos, Jessica made her biggest mistake. She contacted Rebecca's fertility doctor, posing as Rebecca to try to access her medical records. The clinic had protocols in place and immediately notified Rebecca of the attempted breach. This gave Rebecca the ammunition she needed. Identity theft and attempted access of medical records were serious crimes. She filed a police report, finally involving authorities, but only for these specific incidents, not the broader family drama. Jessica panicked. She showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m., pounding on the door. You have to make her stop, she screamed through the door. I'm your sister too. How can you take her side? I called building security without opening the door. As they escorted her out, she screamed threats about ruining my life too, how she knew things about me that would destroy my career. Empty threats, but the neighbors heard everything. The next morning, Rebecca's lawyer sent Jessica a cease and desist letter. It outlined every incident of harassment, every threatening message, every attempt to damage Rebecca and Malik's reputations. It was comprehensive and damning. Jessica's response was to try to manipulate our parents into taking out a loan to help her. She claimed she needed money for a lawyer to fight Rebecca's lies. Dad, showing backbone for the first time in my memory, refused. We've enabled you enough, he said. You poisoned your sister. You recorded yourself doing it. There's no excuse for that. This rejection broke something in Jessica. She started making increasingly erratic decisions. She pulled the children out of school, claiming Rebecca had spies there. She moved out of our parents' house and into a motel, dragging the confused kids with her. Child Protective Services got involved after the school reported the children's absence and Jessica's concerning behavior. This wasn't Rebecca's doing, but Jessica blamed her anyway. The social worker who visited found the children living in chaos, eating fast food for every meal while Jessica spent her time creating fake social media accounts and recording rambling videos about how she was being persecuted. During this time, Rebecca focused on her pregnancy. The stress was affecting her health, and her doctor put her on partial bed rest. I spent most evenings at her house, helping with meals and just being present. We didn't talk about Jessica during these visits. Instead, we planned for the twins, discussed baby names, and watched mindless TV shows. But Jessica wouldn't let us have peace. She discovered where Rebecca's doctor's appointments were and started showing up at the medical building. She wouldn't approach Rebecca directly, just stood in the parking lot watching. It was deeply unsettling. Malik hired private security to accompany Rebecca to appointments. Jessica filmed the security guards and posted videos claiming Rebecca had hired thugs to intimidate her. The comments on these videos were not what Jessica expected. Most people could see through her manipulation and called her out for stalking a pregnant woman. 3 weeks into this nightmare, David's life completely imploded. The board officially fired him for embezzlement. His assets were frozen pending investigation. Samantha had her baby, a girl, and immediately filed for child support. The other women he'd been seeing came forward with their own claims. He was facing financial ruin from multiple directions. In desperation, David did something unexpected. He went to the police and confessed to everything: his affairs, his embezzlement, even his knowledge of Jessica's plans to harm Rebecca. He offered to testify against Jessica in exchange for leniency on his charges. Jessica found out about David's betrayal when detectives showed up at the motel to question her. According to the police report I later saw, she completely lost control, throwing objects and screaming incoherently. The children witnessed everything. That was the final straw for child services. They removed the children from Jessica's custody, placing them temporarily with our parents while the investigation continued. Jessica blamed Rebecca for this too, even though Rebecca had nothing to do with it. The night the children were removed, Jessica sent one last message to Rebecca. It was a video of her standing on a bridge, threatening to jump if Rebecca didn't call off the lawyers and give her money. Rebecca immediately called emergency services, who found Jessica at the location and took her for psychiatric evaluation. During Jessica's 72-hour hold, more truth came out. The psychiatrist discovered Jessica had been taking David's ADHD medication for years, mixing it with alcohol and other substances. Her erratic behavior was partly fueled by substance abuse, though it didn't excuse her calculated cruelty. Our parents aged visibly during this period. They attended therapy themselves, finally confronting how their favoritism had created this situation. "We always gave Jessica what she wanted," Mom told me tearfully. "We thought we were keeping peace. We were just teaching her that she could hurt people without consequences." When Jessica was released from psychiatric hold, she found herself truly alone for the first time. David was gone, dealing with his own legal troubles. Her children were with our parents, who now had strict boundaries about her access to them. Her friends had distanced themselves after seeing her social media meltdowns. Even Marcus, the lawyer she'd been having an affair with, had filed a restraining order after she showed up at his house and confronted his wife. She moved into a smaller motel and got a job at a grocery store, her first real employment in years. She continued posting videos, but they became less coherent, more rambling. Her followers dwindled as people lost interest in her manufactured drama. Meanwhile, Rebecca's pregnancy progressed. The twins were growing well despite the stress. She and Malik had turned the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting it soft yellow with white trim. I helped them assemble cribs one afternoon, and for a few hours, we could pretend everything was normal. But normal was still far away. Jessica discovered Rebecca's baby registry online and began ordering items to be delivered, but with disturbing notes attached. "For the babies you stole from me," one read. Another said, "Hope these replace the ones that didn't make it." Rebecca had to contact every store on her registry to block Jessica's access. It was exhausting, having to constantly defend against these small acts of harassment. But Rebecca remained methodical, documenting everything, building her case. 6 weeks after the dinner confrontation, Jessica made one final desperate play. She contacted a tabloid journalist, offering to sell her story about the evil sister who destroyed her life. She provided the recordings she'd made, the ones she thought showed Rebecca and Malik confessing to crimes. The journalist, however, was more interested in Jessica's own admissions on those recordings. Instead of the expose Jessica wanted, the article focused on her confession to poisoning her pregnant sister. Jessica had accidentally given them evidence of her own crimes while trying to frame Rebecca. When the article came out, Jessica's remaining support evaporated. The few people who'd believed her victim narrative were horrified by her own words admitting to causing Rebecca's miscarriage. Even online, where she'd found some sympathizers, people turned against her. Our parents finally took decisive action. They filed for temporary custody of Jessica's children and began the process of protecting them from their mother's influence. It was painful for them, but they recognized that those children needed stability and safety. Jessica's response was to violate the cease and desist order spectacularly. She showed up at Rebecca's house while I was there for dinner. She didn't ring the doorbell, just stood in the yard, staring at the windows. When Malik went out to tell her to leave, she started screaming about how Rebecca had ruined her life, how she'd stolen everything. The neighbors called the police. As they arrived, Jessica pulled out her phone and started live streaming, claiming she was being arrested for loving her sister too much. The officers were professional but firm. She was violating a legal order. She needed to leave or face arrest. Jessica chose arrest. As they handcuffed her, she looked directly at the camera and said, "Rebecca, I know you're watching. This isn't over. You took everything from me, my husband, my children, my life. I'll never stop making you pay." But even as she said it, you could see the defeat in her eyes. She'd lost everything, not because Rebecca had taken it, but because she'd destroyed it herself with her lies, her cruelty, and her inability to accept responsibility for her actions. I stayed with Rebecca that night. She was shaken by Jessica's appearance, but also strangely calm. "I knew it would come to this," she said. "Jessica always has to have the last word, even when she's already lost." The arrest was a violation of her cease and desist, which meant actual legal consequences. Jessica spent the night in jail and was released on bail the next morning. Our parents, finally drawing firm boundaries, refused to pay her bail. She had to use a bail bondsman, adding another financial burden to her mounting problems. The stress of everything was taking its toll on Rebecca. Her doctor was concerned about her blood pressure and the risk of early labor. She was put on complete bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. Malik took time off work to care for her, and I arranged my schedule to be there during the days when he couldn't. During this quiet period, Rebecca finally opened up about the depth of Jessica's betrayal. "It wasn't just David," she said one afternoon. "It was every boyfriend I ever had, every achievement I worked for, every moment of happiness. She couldn't stand to see me have anything she didn't." She showed me old diaries from high school, where she'd documented Jessica's systematic campaign to undermine her. Teachers Jessica had charmed into giving Rebecca lower grades, friends Jessica had turned against her with carefully placed lies, opportunities Jessica had sabotaged with anonymous complaints. "I thought getting away for college would help," Rebecca continued, "but she followed me, applied to the same school using my essays, got into my sorority, even dated my ex-boyfriends after I broke up with them, just to prove she could." The pattern was clear and disturbing. Jessica's entire identity seemed built around taking things from Rebecca. Without that dynamic, she didn't know who she was. And now, with nothing left to take, she was falling apart. 2 months after the confrontation, the legal consequences began catching up with everyone. David pled guilty to embezzlement charges and received 2 years in prison, though he'd likely serve less with good behavior. His testimony against Jessica was part of his plea deal. Jessica's trial for identity theft and harassment was set for the following month. Her public defender advised her to take a plea deal, but Jessica refused. She insisted on her day in court, convinced she could make everyone see that she was the real victim. Our parents struggled with the decision to testify against Jessica. They'd already provided statements about the poisoning video and Jessica's confession, but taking the stand felt like a final betrayal of their daughter. Their therapist helped them see it differently. Testifying was about protecting the grandchildren and holding Jessica accountable, not about choosing sides. During this time, Rebecca went into early labor. The stress had finally overwhelmed her body's ability to protect the pregnancy. I was with her when her water broke, 5 weeks before her due date. The rush to the hospital was terrifying, with Rebecca gripping my hand and whispering, "Not again, please not again." But this time was different. The twins, a boy and a girl, were born small but healthy. They spent 2 weeks in the NICU, but there were no serious complications. Rebecca and Malik named them Alexandra and Nicholas. New beginnings with no connection to the family drama. Jessica found out about the births through social media. Someone had posted congratulations on Malik's company page. Her reaction was to send a card to the hospital. "Congratulations on stealing my life so completely. Enjoy my leftovers." Hospital security intercepted the card, adding it to the evidence file for Jessica's upcoming trial. Even in what should have been Rebecca's moment of joy, Jessica couldn't resist trying to cause pain. As the twins came home and life settled into a new routine, the extended family began to heal. Our parents, granted temporary custody of Jessica's children, worked with therapists to undo the damage of their mother's manipulation. The children slowly began to understand that love didn't mean hurting others, that family meant support, not sabotage. David, from prison, sent a letter of apology to Rebecca. It was rambling and self-pitying, but he did acknowledge the pain he'd caused. Rebecca read it once and threw it away. "He's not worth the energy," she said, focused instead on her babies and her future. Jessica's world continued to shrink. She lost her job after missing shifts for court appearances. Her motel kicked her out for non-payment. She moved in with a distant cousin who hadn't heard the full story, but that arrangement lasted less than a week once the cousin Googled Jessica's name and found the tabloid articles. The night before her trial, Jessica made one last attempt at manipulation. She called our parents, sobbing about how sorry she was, how she'd gotten help and was better now. She begged them to drop the charges, to give her another chance. When they gently refused, explaining that the charges weren't theirs to drop, she exploded in rage, showing that nothing had really changed. The trial itself was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Jessica's own recordings, meant to blackmail Rebecca, became proof of her crimes. Her social media posts showed a clear pattern of harassment. The identity theft at the medical office was documented and undeniable. Jessica took the stand against her lawyer's advice. She tried to paint herself as a loving sister driven to desperation by Rebecca's cruelty, but under cross-examination, her story fell apart. She couldn't explain the poisoning video. She couldn't justify the identity theft. Her tears, which had always been her weapon, now seemed hollow and manipulative to everyone watching. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge, noting the particular cruelty of poisoning a pregnant woman and the ongoing harassment, sentenced Jessica to 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to have no contact with Rebecca, Malik, or their children. As they led Jessica away, she turned to look at Rebecca one last time. The hatred in her eyes was mixed with something else, confusion maybe, as if she still couldn't understand how her lifetime of manipulation had led to this moment. Rebecca didn't attend the sentencing. She was home with her twins, building the life Jessica had tried so hard to destroy. When I told her about the verdict, she simply nodded. "It's over," she said quietly. "Finally, it's over." But we all knew it wasn't really over. Jessica would serve her time and eventually be released. She'd have to rebuild her life from nothing, hopefully learning from her mistakes, but possibly just becoming more bitter. The children would grow up knowing their mother had chosen cruelty over family. The scars would remain. Still, as I watched Rebecca cuddle her babies while Malik made dinner, I saw hope. She'd survived Jessica's worst attacks. She'd protected herself and her family. She'd refused to let Jessica's poison, literal and figurative, destroy her chance at happiness. Our family would never be what it once was. The illusion of harmony had been shattered, replaced by something more honest, if more painful. But maybe that was better. Maybe facing the truth, however ugly, was the first step toward real healing. As I left Rebecca's house that evening, I thought about the different paths the two sisters had taken. Rebecca had chosen love, building a life with Malik and their children. Jessica had chosen hate, destroying everything she touched in her need to hurt her sister. The consequences of those choices were now clear. Rebecca was surrounded by love, building a future. Jessica was alone, facing the ruins of the life she'd demolished with her own hands. It was justice, of a sort, not perfect, not complete, but real. The twins were crying as I reached my car, the normal sounds of a healthy family. Through the window, I could see Malik and Rebecca working together to soothe them, a team united in love and purpose. This was what Jessica had tried to steal, what she'd never understood. Real love wasn't about taking from others, it was about building something together. As I drove away, I knew the hard times weren't over. There would be appeals, probation hearings, and the ongoing challenge of protecting the children from their mother's influence. But Rebecca had proven she could handle whatever came next. She'd faced her sister's worst and emerged stronger. The family we'd grown up in was gone, destroyed by Jessica's choices and our parents' enabling. But from those ashes, something new was growing. A family based on truth instead of pretense, on accountability instead of excuses. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The morning after Jessica's sentencing, I woke to my phone buzzing with texts from an unknown number. The messages were from Jessica's cellmate's sister, offering to deliver messages for a fee. I blocked the number immediately, but more kept coming throughout the day from different phones. Jessica had found a way to continue her harassment even from behind bars. Rebecca and Malik decided to change their phone numbers, but Jessica's reach extended beyond direct contact. She'd convinced another inmate to have their family members create new social media accounts, posting old photos of Rebecca and David with captions about true love stolen by jealous sisters. The posts tagged Rebecca's colleagues, Malik's business partners, even the pediatrician caring for the twins. Our parents discovered Jessica had been calling them collect multiple times daily, leaving voicemails that alternated between tearful apologies and vicious threats. When they stopped accepting the calls, she started writing letters, dozens of them, sometimes 5 or 6 arriving in a single day. The letters contained detailed plans for what she'd do when released, how she'd get her children back, how she'd make Rebecca pay. One letter particularly disturbed our father. In it, Jessica described watching Rebecca's house, noting the times Malik left for work, when I visited, even when the mail was delivered. The details were too accurate to be guesswork. Someone on the outside was feeding her information. That someone turned out to be Klaus, a man Jessica had met through a prison pen pal website. He'd been visiting her regularly, bringing her commissary money and promising to help her get revenge on Rebecca. Our parents only discovered this when Klaus showed up at their house, claiming Jessica had sent him to collect her belongings, which apparently included family photo albums and Rebecca's old yearbooks. Dad refused to let him in, but Klaus returned the next day, and the next. He'd park outside their house for hours, just watching. watching. When Mom finally called the police, Klaus insisted he was just visiting his fiancé's family. Jessica had apparently accepted his proposal during a jailhouse visit, despite having known him for less than 2 months. Rebecca hired a private investigator to look into Klaus. What they found was disturbing: a history of attaching himself to incarcerated women, draining their families of money with promises to help their loved ones. He had 3 restraining orders from previous fiancés' families, but Jessica either didn't know or didn't care. She'd found someone willing to be her weapon on the outside. The investigator also discovered something else. Klaus had been in contact with David's former mistresses, trying to gather dirt on Rebecca and Malik. Most had refused to talk to him, but one, a woman named Victoria, had been feeding him information in exchange for money Jessica promised she'd have soon. This explained the accurate details in Jessica's letters. Victoria worked at a coffee shop near Rebecca's neighborhood and had been noting their routines. When confronted by the investigator, she broke down and admitted Klaus had promised her $5,000 for information that could destroy Rebecca's perfect life. Meanwhile, Jessica's children were struggling. The oldest had started having nightmares, calling out for mommy in his sleep. The middle child had become withdrawn, refusing to speak at school. The youngest, barely 2, kept asking when mommy was coming home. Our parents were doing their best, but the children needed more help than they could provide. Rebecca made a difficult decision. Despite the no-contact order, she felt responsible for her nephews and niece. She couldn't interact with them directly, but she set up education funds for each child and arranged for a child psychologist to work with them weekly. The bills went to our parents, but Rebecca paid them quietly, never seeking recognition. Klaus escalated his harassment. He started showing up at Malik's office, claiming to have business proposals. When security turned him away, he'd wait in the parking garage, approaching Malik's colleagues with stories about how Malik had destroyed an innocent family. Several clients expressed concern, and Malik's partners called a meeting to discuss the situation. Malik handled it brilliantly. He presented all the documentation, the restraining orders against Klaus, Jessica's conviction, the evidence of her crimes. His partners were appalled, not at Malik, but at the lengths Jessica was going to from prison. They hired additional security and banned Klaus from the building, but Klaus wasn't done. He showed up at the twins' daycare, claiming to be their uncle. The daycare followed protocol and called Rebecca immediately. She arrived to find Klaus arguing with the director, insisting he had a right to see his family. The police arrested him for trespassing, but he was released within hours. That night, Rebecca found Klaus in her backyard. He was taking photos through the windows with a telephoto lens. Malik chased him off, but not before Klaus shouted that Jessica would never stop fighting for what was hers. The security system captured everything, and this time Klaus was arrested for stalking. But even from jail, he managed to cause problems. He'd given Jessica's letters to other inmates' visitors to mail, circumventing the prison's monitoring system. The letters contained photos Klaus had taken, Rebecca at the grocery store, Malik at a gas station, me walking into my apartment building. Our parents were at their breaking point. Mom had developed anxiety attacks, jumping every time the doorbell rang. Dad had started sleeping with a baseball bat beside the bed. They loved Jessica's children, but felt trapped between protecting them and protecting themselves from their daughter's escalating campaign of terror. Then came the breaking point. Jessica's cellmate was released and showed up at Rebecca's house with a message. She stood on the porch, reading from a paper in Jessica's handwriting. I know where the twins go to daycare. I know what time you pick them up. I know the route you take home. Klaus will be watching. Always watching. Give me my children back, or I'll take yours. Rebecca called the police immediately. The woman was arrested for communicating threats, but the damage was done. Rebecca and Malik pulled the twins from daycare, hired round-the-clock security, and installed additional cameras covering every angle of their property. The stress was affecting everyone. Rebecca's milk supply dropped, and she struggled to feed the twins. Malik developed insomnia, checking the security feeds multiple times each night. I started varying my routes to their house, paranoid about being followed. Our parents aged years and weeks, the strain of protecting Jessica's children while fearing their mother visible in every line on their faces. 3 months into Jessica's sentence, she made a mistake. She'd been corresponding with multiple men through prison pen pal sites, promising each of them different things in exchange for their help. When 2 of them showed up to visit on the same day, a fight broke out in the visiting room. Both men were arrested, and Jessica's male privileges were revoked. Without her ability to orchestrate harassment from inside, Jessica grew desperate. She started picking fights with other inmates, hoping to extend her sentence and delay the inevitable. But the warden saw through her plan. Instead of additional charges, she was placed in solitary confinement for her own protection. Klaus, meanwhile, had violated his bail conditions by contacting Rebecca's family. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, but not before sending one final package to Rebecca's house. Inside were hundreds of photos he'd taken over months. The family at parks, stores, restaurants. The detail was obsessive. Notes written on the back of each photo describing their activities. The prosecutor used the photos to file additional charges against both Klaus and Jessica. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, based on the threat about taking the twins. Criminal harassment. Stalking by proxy. The charges would add years to Jessica's sentence if convicted. Jessica's public defender convinced her to take a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the kidnapping conspiracy charge, she pled guilty to the harassment and stalking charges. Her sentence was extended by 3 years, and she was transferred to a facility 500 miles away, making it harder for her to maintain local connections. Our parents made the difficult decision to file for permanent custody of Jessica's children. The court proceedings were heartbreaking. The oldest child testified via closed-circuit TV about his mother's behavior, describing how she'd taught him to lie about Rebecca, how she'd told him Aunt Rebecca stole Daddy. The judge granted permanent custody to our parents, with Rebecca and Malik named as guardians should anything happen to them. David, from prison, signed away his parental rights without contest. He wanted nothing to do with the children or the chaos Jessica had created. His only request was that his name be removed from their birth certificates, a legal impossibility that showed how desperately he wanted to erase his connection to Jessica. With Klaus in jail and Jessica's communication limited, life slowly stabilized. Rebecca and Malik maintained their security measures but began venturing out more. The twins started reaching developmental milestones. First smiles, rolling over, babbling, normal baby things that felt like victories after months of crisis. I helped our parents redecorate Jessica's children's rooms, removing reminders of their chaotic past and creating spaces that felt safe and permanent. The children responded well to stability and therapy. The oldest stopped having nightmares. The middle child began talking again. The youngest adapted quickly, calling our parents grandma Grandma and Grandpa without prompting. 6 months after Jessica's transfer, we received word that she'd been placed on sewer slide watch. Not because she was actually sewer slidal, but because she'd been threatening self-harm to manipulate staff into giving her privileges. The psychiatrist's report was damning. Patient shows no genuine remorse, continues to blame others for her situation, and demonstrates persistent antisocial behavior patterns. Rebecca made another difficult decision. She wrote to the prison, offering to pay for Jessica to receive proper psychiatric treatment, not for Jessica's sake, but for her children, who deserved a mother who might someday be capable of healthy relationships. The offer was made through lawyers, maintaining the no-contact order while still extending help. Jessica refused. She sent word through her lawyer that she didn't need help, that Rebecca was the one who needed treatment for her jealousy and vindictiveness. Even faced with the consequences of her actions, she couldn't admit fault. The children continued to thrive with our parents. The oldest joined Little League, the middle child discovered a love of art, and the youngest started preschool. Rebecca and Malik were careful to maintain boundaries, but they included the children in family gatherings, ensuring they grew up knowing they were loved despite their parents' failures. A year into Jessica's extended sentence, Klaus was released. He immediately left the state, apparently finding another incarcerated woman to attach himself to. The restraining orders remained in place, but his departure brought relief. One less threat to monitor. Jessica found new ways to cause trouble. She filed lawsuits from prison, against Rebecca for alienation of affection, against our parents for kidnapping her children, against Malik's company for conspiracy to commit fraud. Each suit was dismissed as frivolous, but they still required responses, still cost money and time. She also began writing a memoir about her wrongful persecution, finding a vanity publisher willing to print it for a fee. When excerpts appeared online, they were so obviously fabricated that even Jessica's few remaining supporters distanced themselves. The book portrayed her as a victim of a vast conspiracy, with Rebecca as the mastermind who'd planned her downfall since childhood. Our parents had to get a restraining order against the publisher when they tried to interview Jessica's children for a sequel. The children's therapist testified that any contact with their mother's delusions would undo years of progress. The judge agreed, placing strict limits on any mention of the children in Jessica's writings. Rebecca's twins grew into curious, happy toddlers. They took their first steps, said their first words, developed distinct personalities. Alexandra was bold and adventurous, while Nicholas was thoughtful and cautious. Watching them grow felt like proof that life could move forward, that Jessica's poison hadn't infected everything, but reminders persisted. Every legal document regarding the children had to be carefully worded to prevent Jessica from finding loopholes. Every school registration required explanations about custody arrangements. Every medical appointment meant updating security protocols to prevent unauthorized access to records. Malik's business thrived despite the early challenges. His partners, impressed by how he'd handled the situation, gave him greater responsibilities. He used his success to ensure financial security for both sets of children, setting up trusts that Jessica couldn't touch even after her release. I found myself becoming the family historian, documenting the truth for when the children were old enough to understand, not to poison them against their mother, but to ensure they had facts when Jessica inevitably tried to rewrite history. The therapist said having a clear, honest record would help them process their complicated family dynamics as adults. 2 years into her extended sentence, Jessica was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder by the prison psychiatrist. The diagnosis surprised no one but Jessica, who fired her lawyer for not preventing the evaluation. She continued to refuse treatment, insisting there was nothing wrong with her that getting her children back wouldn't fix. Our parents struggled with guilt. They wondered if different choices might have prevented this outcome. Their therapist helped them understand that while they'd enabled Jessica's behavior, her choices were her own. They couldn't have loved her into being a different person. Rebecca rarely spoke about Jessica anymore. When asked, she'd simply say her sister was away and change the subject, but I knew she checked the prison website regularly, monitoring Jessica's release date, preparing for the inevitable return. The children grew more resilient each year. They knew their mother was in prison, but not the details. The therapist advised age-appropriate honesty, so they understood their mother had made bad choices but wasn't a bad person. It was a delicate balance, protecting them while preparing them for future contact if Jessica ever genuinely changed. 3 years passed. Klaus died in a hammered driving accident, removing one future threat. David was released on parole and immediately left the state, wanting no part of his former life. He never attempted contact with his children, biological or otherwise. Jessica's behavior in prison gradually improved, not because she'd changed, but because she'd learned that good behavior meant earlier release. She attended required programs, worked in the prison library, and avoided major infractions. But letters to our parents revealed her true thoughts, elaborate plans for regaining custody, forcing Rebecca to pay for her crimes, and reclaiming her stolen life. As Jessica's release date approached, Rebecca and Malik made preparations. They upgraded security systems, renewed restraining orders, and created detailed safety plans. The children's schools were notified, with Jessica's photo distributed to all staff. It felt like preparing for a storm, necessary but exhausting. Our parents decided to move. They found a house in a gated community 2 hours away, far enough to discourage casual harassment, but close enough to maintain family connections. The children adjusted well, making new friends and thriving in their new schools. Rebecca helped with the move, packing years of memories while trying not to think about why it was necessary. In Jessica's old room, she found a box of childhood photos, the two of them at birthday parties, family vacations, school events. Before everything went wrong, she kept one photo, tucked it away in a drawer, a reminder of the sister she'd once had, before jealousy and hatred consumed her. The twins started preschool, a milestone that felt monumental after everything. Rebecca watched them run into their classroom, backpacks bouncing, and felt a moment of pure joy. They were growing up free from the poison that had infected her childhood. That alone made everything worth it. As Jessica's release date drew closer, the family attorney filed for permanent restraining orders. The judge, reviewing the extensive history, granted them without hesitation. Jessica would be legally barred from contacting Rebecca, Malik, their children, or our parents. Violating the orders would mean immediate return to prison. A month before Jessica's release, she sent one final letter to our parents through her lawyer. She claimed to have found religion, to have changed, to want only to make amends. She begged for one chance to see her children, promising she'd respect all boundaries. Our parents, on advice from the children's therapist, declined. Trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with words. The children, now older and more aware, aware, began asking harder questions. Why couldn't they see their mother? Why did she do bad things? Our parents answered honestly but gently, focusing on the importance of choices and consequences. The oldest, now 8, nodded solemnly and said he understood. The younger two accepted the simple explanation that mommy needed to learn how to be kind before she could visit. Rebecca's twins flourished, unaware of the drama that had preceded their birth. They played with their cousins at family gatherings, the children forming bonds that transcended their complicated origins. Watching them together, it was possible to imagine a future where the past didn't define everything. The week before Jessica's release, Rebecca and Malik took a vacation. They needed distance, physical and emotional, from what was coming. I stayed with our parents, helping them prepare for whatever Jessica might do upon release. We installed new locks, updated emergency contact lists, and practiced safety protocols with the children. Jessica was released on a Tuesday morning. By noon, she'd already violated parole by attempting to access her children's school records online. Her parole officer warned her once. By evening, she'd been caught driving past our parents' old house, apparently unaware they'd moved. Strike 2. She lasted 3 days. On Friday, she appeared at Rebecca's empty house. They were still on vacation, screaming at the windows, demanding her life back. Neighbors called police. When officers arrived, Jessica attacked them, clawing and biting like a wild animal. She was arrested for assault, parole violation, and violating the restraining order. This time, the judge showed no leniency. Jessica was sentenced to 5 more years, the maximum for her violations. As they led her away, she screamed that she'd never stop, that Rebecca would pay, that the children belonged to her. The courtroom clerk later told me it was the worst meltdown she'd seen in 20 years. Rebecca and Malik returned from vacation to find their home undamaged but surrounded by police tape. The security footage showed Jessica trying every window and door, growing increasingly frantic when she couldn't get in. It was disturbing to watch. This person who shared Rebecca's DNA reduced to such desperate madness. Our parents felt relief mixed with profound sadness. Their daughter was gone, replaced by someone they didn't recognize. They continued therapy, working through grief for the child Jessica had been, and acceptance of the person she'd become. The therapist reminded them that protecting the grandchildren was their priority now. Those grandchildren continued to thrive. They joined sports teams, excelled in school, made friends, normal childhood experiences that felt like miracles considering their origins. Rebecca and Malik were the fun aunt and uncle who attended every game and recital, providing stability and love without overstepping boundaries. Life settled into new rhythms, birthday parties without fear of disruption, holidays celebrated in peace, family dinners where laughter replaced tension. The scars remained but no longer defined daily existence. Jessica's children began to understand their story in age-appropriate ways. The oldest wrote a school essay about choosing kindness over anger, clearly processing his experiences. The middle child's art evolved from dark scribbles to bright landscapes. The youngest, with no memory of chaos, simply grew up loved and secure. Rebecca rarely mentioned Jessica anymore. When she did, it was with sadness rather than anger. She chose hatred. She'd say simply, "I chose happiness," and she had. Despite everything Jessica had tried to steal or destroy, Rebecca had built a beautiful life. The twins started kindergarten, riding the bus with their cousins, watching them board together, backpacks almost bigger than they were. Our parents cried, happy tears this time. The family had survived, transformed but intact. Jessica would serve her time and probably be released again someday. She'd likely violate parole again, return to prison again, repeat the cycle until age or exhaustion stopped her, but her power was gone. The family had learned to live without fear, to find joy despite her existence. In the end, Jessica had been right about one thing. Rebecca had won, not through manipulation or cruelty, but by choosing love over hate, building instead of destroying, protecting what mattered most. The twins' laughter echoed through the house, proof that life, real life, had triumphed over Jessica's poison. Our family's story wasn't unique. Toxic people exist in many families, causing pain and chaos until others learn to protect themselves. But survival was possible. Happiness was possible. Even after everything, love endured. As I finished writing this account, I realized Jessica had given us an unexpected gift. In trying to destroy Rebecca, she'd revealed our family's strength. We'd faced the worst and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. That was its own victory. The children were calling for dinner. Normal voices on a normal evening in a normal home. The most beautiful sound in the world.